Some moments change the course of your life. That day, what should have been an ordinary business trip turned into the greatest challenge of my career. A false accusation, an unexpected landing, and moments that unveiled the dark side of the job. But sometimes, chaos is the beginning of transformation. When I stepped onto the plane, the sleek yet modest suit I wore seemed like nothing more than a reflection of my professional seriousness. As a PR director, my task on this flight was to evaluate the customer experience. However, no one knew who I was, at least not yet. This was a mission of observation, and silence was my greatest ally. As I entered the first-class cabin, everything appeared perfect on the surface. Leather seats, the pleasant aroma of freshly brewed coffee, and soft background music. Yet my instincts told me something was off. I took my seat, opened the book in my hand, and gazed out of the window. I made every effort to blend in, striving to look like just another business traveler. The man sitting directly in front of me immediately caught my attention. Dressed in a sharp suit, his impatience was palpable. He criticized every move the flight attendants made, turning his nose up at the towel handed to him and sending back the coffee they offered. Even the strained smiles on the flight attendants' faces couldn't mask their discomfort. His petulant behavior quickly became one of the details I mentally noted. The cabin door opened and the captain stepped inside. His uniform was impeccable. His posture exuded confidence. But beneath that confidence, there was a hint of arrogance. His eyes scanned the cabin and rested on me for a brief moment. The faint smirk that crossed his face made me feel seen, as if he'd figured something out. At that moment, I realized this flight was going to be more complicated than I had anticipated. Shortly after the captain's announcement, the flight took off. Everything seemed to be running smoothly. But half an hour later, the tranquil atmosphere of the cabin was shattered. The man in front of me suddenly stood up and shouted, "My wallet! My wallet's been stolen!" The anger in his voice startled everyone around him. The flight attendants rushed to his side, trying to calm him down, but it was no use. "Someone here must have taken it," he yelled, glaring at the passengers around him. For a brief moment, his eyes locked onto mine. The scene felt eerily familiar. Accusations, prejudice, and uncertainty. Yet I remained silent, continuing to observe. Captain Hartley entered the cabin swiftly, his narrowed eyes and authoritative demeanor radiating frustration. After listening to the man's complaint, his gaze once again settled on me. Even the tone of his voice hinted at his judgment. "Ma'am," he said in a cold voice, "we'd like to check your bag." My eyes met the captain's, and I knew every passenger's attention was now on me. But without the slightest tremor in my voice, I replied, "Of course. But perhaps we should also discuss how accurately you're following your procedures." This was the beginning of a long night, one that would lead to twists and turns I couldn't have foreseen. The captain's demeanor only added to the tension in the cabin. The flight attendant's trembling hands as she checked my bag revealed how humiliating the situation had become. I placed my bag on the table, and its contents were methodically removed: a tablet, a notebook, a few personal items, and an elegant scarf. No wallet, no incriminating evidence. The flight attendant looked up at the captain and quietly said, "There's nothing here, Captain." Hartley's expression shifted from anger to uncertainty, but he wasn't ready to back down. "Check again," he ordered, his tone sharper this time. This wasn't just about inspecting a bag anymore. It had become a power struggle. The goal was no longer to find the truth, but to intimidate me. I calmly began to repack my belongings. "Captain," I said, my voice steady and resolute, "procedures like this follow a standard, and I can assure you, you are far from meeting it." Hartley narrowed his eyes. "We're just doing our job, ma'am," he replied, though the growing tension in his voice betrayed his unease. The passengers in the cabin watched the scene in silence. Some stared at me with prejudice, while others lowered their heads, seemingly recognizing the injustice of the situation. Just then, a flight attendant discovered a wallet beneath the accusing businessman's seat. "Sir," she said in a gentle but trembling voice, I believe this is your wallet." Relief flashed in her eyes as she held it up, but the tension in the room didn't dissipate immediately. Everyone knew Hartley wouldn't retreat so easily. The man's face turned crimson. "Oh, yes, I must have dropped it," he muttered. But his mumbled apology did little to lessen the weight of the false accusations he'd hurled moments ago. Captain Hartley's face fell. Attempting to save face, he said, "It seems there's been a misunderstanding." His voice dripped with insincere regret, but I wasn't about to let it slide. Slowly, I stood up and reached into my jacket pocket, pulling out my ID card. The gold lettering gleamed under the cabin lights. Amara Johnson, Public Relations Director. Hartley's expression froze. Murmurs rippled through the passengers. "What? She's a director? This is outrageous." Taking a step toward him, I said, "Captain Hartley, I am not just another passenger on this flight. You have blatantly violated our company's values and protocols. Your next actions will have significant consequences for both your career and the reputation of this airline." Hartley's shoulders slumped involuntarily, though I could see him clenching his teeth in defiance. My words weren't just directed at him. They were a statement to everyone in the cabin. I would not remain silent, and I would stand up for what was right. Slowly, I returned to my seat, opened my book, and resumed reading. But I felt no sense of peace. This was merely the beginning. Hartley's arrogance wasn't entirely broken, and I could feel that more conflict lay ahead on this flight. I could feel Hartley's gaze burning into my back. He had lost control, and the public blow to his reputation was something he couldn't accept. But to think he would quietly retreat would have been naive. The most dangerous trait of those who abuse power is their relentless desire to reclaim it. The cabin was enveloped in an uneasy silence, broken only by the monotonous hum of the plane's engines. But I wasn't at ease. The words on the pages of my book blurred, tangled with the thoughts echoing in my mind. I didn't know what Hartley was planning, but I was certain he wasn't done. Not long after, the intercom crackled, and Hartley's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone wrapped in a veneer of calm, "we will need to make an unscheduled landing at a regional airport for security reasons. Thank you for your understanding." I immediately knew this wasn't due to a real security threat. Hartley was using this as a pretext to target me. A flight attendant approached me cautiously, her expression laced with fear. "Miss Johnson," she said, her voice trembling, "Captain Hartley has requested that security personnel meet you at the gate. This isn't standard procedure." I took a deep breath and reassured her, keeping my voice steady. "Don't worry," I said. "He's targeting me because he's forgotten who I am. But when he realizes his mistake, it will cost him far more than he expects." As the plane began its descent, the tension in the cabin thickened. Whispered conversation spread among the passengers. Some stole glances at me, while others seemed lost in confusion. When the plane finally touched down at the small regional airport, the flashing security lights reflected through the windows. As the wheels hit the tarmac, a ripple of movement passed through the cabin. Hartley emerged from the cockpit and strode down the aisle, his eyes hard and defiant. Stopping next to me, he leaned in with a mocking smirk. "Miss Johnson," he said, his tone laced with menace, "it's time for you to meet the security team." I stood, maintaining a calm, professional demeanor. "Captain Hartley," I replied, my voice measured, "do you realize that these theatrics damage not only your reputation, but also the integrity of our airline?" He didn't respond, merely gesturing toward the door. Choosing my words carefully, I walked toward the security officers waiting outside. When I presented my ID and identified my position, their expressions shifted immediately. "Ms. Johnson," one of them said, his voice suddenly respectful, "we weren't aware—" "There's much you don't know," I replied firmly. "Disregarding company policies and procedures like this has serious consequences. This isn't just about me. It's about the integrity of this airline." I noticed Hartley standing nearby, watching the interaction. The confidence in his eyes quickly drained as he realized the tide had turned. But this was only the beginning. I knew justice would prevail, but first I needed to shatter his arrogance completely. The other passengers watched the scene unfold from the plane's windows. Righting this wrong in full view of everyone wasn't just about vindicating myself. It was about demonstrating the triumph of justice. But I knew Hartley wouldn't back down easily. The real battle was just beginning, outside the plane. The security officers escorted me calmly to a private conference room inside the terminal. The room was quiet, insulated from the chaos outside. Seated at the table, I knew Hartley would walk through that door in a matter of minutes. This time, I wasn't alone. The company's head of security and a few senior officials were present to clarify the situation. When the door opened, the conflicted look on Hartley's face brought me a quiet sense of triumph. He wasn't as confident as before, but he still tried to maintain a facade of arrogance. Watching his anger and frustration rise felt like a reward for my patience. Silently, he took the seat across from me. "It seems things didn't go as you expected, Hartley," I said, my voice calm but authoritative. "Would you like to explain how you, as a captain, managed to abuse your authority on this flight?" Hartley's face flushed red, but he spoke in a firm tone. "My responsibility is to ensure the safety of my passengers, Miss Johnson. If one of them poses a potential threat, it is my duty to intervene." "Potential threat?" I raised an eyebrow. I was simply sitting quietly with a book in my hands. The security team confirmed there was no threat whatsoever. And let me be clear, your personal biases targeting a passenger in this manner are completely unacceptable. Hartley remained silent, though the fury in his eyes was unmistakable. This was a blow to his authority, and the fact that it was happening in front of witnesses only deepened his humiliation. Just then, the door opened again, and the airline's CEO, James Delacroix, entered the room. With a composed demeanor, he walked to the head of the table and set down his files. "It seems we're facing a serious crisis here today," he said. "Amara, could you walk us through what happened?" I took a deep breath and recounted the events clearly and concisely. I explained how Hartley unnecessarily diverted the flight, targeted me unjustly, and jeopardized the safety of the passengers on board. "This isn't just a personal attack," I said. "It's a systemic issue that could tarnish the reputation of our airline. Such behavior is entirely against our company's values." Hartley began to speak, but Delacroix raised a hand to silence him. "That's enough, Captain Hartley," he said. "Your actions are a clear violation of company policy. You will now be subjected to a formal investigation." The anger in Hartley's eyes gave way to fear. As he stood to leave, he tried to say something, but his voice came out as little more than a strained whisper. The tension and shame in his posture were palpable as he exited the room. Once he was gone, Delacroix turned to me. "Amara, thank you for your composure and professionalism today. We'll address the situation promptly. However, I believe this incident has highlighted a deeper issue within our company culture. This isn't just one person's mistake, it's a symptom of a larger problem." His words made it clear to me that this was only the beginning. Holding Hartley accountable was important, but the real task lay in rooting out behaviors like his altogether. This wasn't just a battle, it was the start of a long and necessary war. As I left the meeting, the silence of the corridors mirrored the weight of my thoughts. The enormity of the situation pressed heavily on my shoulders, but I knew I had done the right thing. Justice is never easily won, but it is always worth fighting for. When I arrived at the airline's headquarters, the tension in the air was palpable. The conference room on the top floor, usually cold and quiet, now buzzed with unspoken anxiety. CEO James Delacroix stood at the center, ready to lead the meeting. The senior executives seated around the table understood the gravity of the situation. Before the meeting began, I glanced over my notes one last time. Hartley's actions weren't just a personal attack. They had exposed systemic flaws. If we wanted to prevent such incidents from happening again, we needed a clear roadmap. Delacroix's serious expression set the tone as he began. Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday's incident put our company's reputation at significant risk. Before this spirals into a public relations nightmare, we must resolve the issue. All eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath and stood. This isn't just one person's mistake, I said firmly. This incident reflects a deeper problem within our system. If our security procedures, training programs, and reporting mechanisms allow such behavior, then we are all responsible. Some executives averted their gaze, while others nodded quietly. My words hung heavy in the room. Hartley's actions affected not just me, but also every passenger and crew member on that flight, I continued. This event challenges the core values of our airline. It's time to review not just individual failures, but the processes that enable them. Delacroix nodded in agreement. Amara is right. This isn't just a disciplinary issue. It requires a cultural shift. Amara, what do you propose? With a resolute gaze, I shared my plan. First, we need to establish an independent investigative team, not just to review Hartley's actions, but also to examine our employees' experiences with safety and discrimination. Additionally, we must implement mandatory training programs for all staff. These programs should create genuine awareness about diversity, equity, and inclusion. One executive raised a concern. Wouldn't such an extensive plan be costly? I turned to him and responded unequivocally. The cost of such crises is immeasurable. Losing our reputation would be far more expensive and far harder to recover. Delacroix, maintaining his serious demeanor, said, Amara's plan will be implemented immediately. Furthermore, she will lead this effort. Everyone must focus on this matter. This isn't just about salvaging our reputation. It's essential for the future of this company. As the meeting concluded, I felt both the weight of responsibility and the resolve to see it through. Change wouldn't come easily, but we had the chance to turn this crisis into an opportunity. Returning to my office, a new email caught my attention. It was from Mia, the young flight attendant who had subtly supported me during the flight. In her message, she mentioned a prior complaint she had made about Hartley, which had been dismissed. Attached were documents detailing Hartley's history of mistreating both passengers and crew members. As I reviewed the files, I felt a mix of anger and disappointment. This wasn't just Hartley's personal failing. It reflected a systemic issue within our organization. Taking a deep breath, I replied to Mia, "Thank you for sharing this information. I assure you such issues will no longer be ignored." That night, I sat at my desk, combing through Mia's documents and refining the outline for the new training programs. There was so much to be done, but I knew I wasn't alone. Support was building, and this was just the beginning. That morning, when my alarm went off to remind me of my early meeting, I felt an unusual sense of determination. Mia's documents and the resolve from the previous night's meeting had prepared me for the day ahead. Today wasn't just about confronting Hartley's mistakes. It was about addressing the systemic issues that had been ignored for years. When I entered the conference room, the tension was almost tangible. Hartley stood in the corner, his once arrogant demeanor replaced with visible unease. He was accompanied by his legal team, but his posture no longer resembled that of a confident captain. As the other executives filed in, their eyes gravitated toward me. Taking my place at the head of the table, I arranged my documents and kept my tone steady and firm. Today, we're not just here to discuss an individual's mistakes, but to examine the system that allowed those mistakes to happen. Hartley took a hesitant step forward, his silence and hesitation speaking volumes. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said, his voice tinged with sarcasm. "I was just doing my job. Ensuring safety is my responsibility." I turned to face him, my gaze sharp and unyielding. "Ensuring safety?" I echoed. "Or humiliating a passenger based on your personal biases? You didn't just target me, you jeopardized the safety of every passenger and crew member on that flight." At that moment, Mia, who had joined the meeting, stood up. Her voice trembled, but her words carried undeniable conviction. "I used to be afraid of you." But not anymore. This isn't the first time you've done something like this. My previous reports were ignored, and you put this company's reputation at risk. Mia's courage struck a chord in the room. The silence was so heavy that even breaths felt audible. Hartley faltered, then tried to defend himself. I was just following the rules. If anyone felt uncomfortable because of my actions, that wasn't my intention. Before he could continue, our CEO, Delacqua, interjected. Hartley, bending the rules to suit your own purposes is not an excuse. The evidence that Amara and Mia have presented clearly shows that this isn't a one-off mistake. It's a pattern of systematic misconduct. By the end of the meeting, Hartley's employment was terminated immediately. But for me, this wasn't the ultimate victory. It was just the beginning. People like Hartley could be removed from the system, but unless the structural issues were addressed, similar mistakes would happen again. After the meeting, I had a brief conversation with Mia. What you did today was incredibly brave, I said. People like Hartley can be intimidating, but you spoke the truth. This company needs leaders like you. A small smile crossed Mia's face. I just did what was right, she replied. But now I feel like I'm not alone. That night, as I sat alone in my office, I laid out a long list in front of me. Training programs, improvements to employee rights, new procedures to combat discrimination. Each line represented a step toward transforming the company. But the most crucial step was ensuring that everyone became part of this change. Slowly but surely, I realized that our airline needed to carry more than just passengers in the skies. It needed to carry equality and justice as well. And for me, that was a deeply personal mission. As the echoes of determination from the meeting lingered in my mind, I prepared to embark on a new chapter the next morning. Terminating Hartley's employment had been an important step, but this wasn't just about removing one person from the system. It had to be the beginning of a complete overhaul. Walking into the office that morning, I noticed a shift in the atmosphere. The once fearful and doubtful gazes of employees now reflected hope and resolve. Some greeted me with a thank you, while others simply smiled. Change was beginning to take root. My first task was to hold an open meeting for all employees. The conference hall was packed, far beyond my expectations. Standing at the center, microphone in hand, I took a deep breath. Friends, I began, my voice calm but firm. What happened yesterday wasn't just about an individual mistake. It revealed systemic issues we all need to confront. This company must be a safe, fair, and equal space, not just in the skies, but on the ground as well. All eyes were on me, listening intently. We are stepping into a new era, I continued. From today forward, everyone's voice will be heard. We will enforce a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, harassment, or mistreatment. We are also launching mandatory training programs for all employees and implementing a new anonymous reporting system. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. The overwhelming support from my colleagues was deeply moving. It reinforced my belief that meaningful change requires collective effort. Later that day, I met with CEO James Delacqua for a one-on-one discussion. Standing by the large windows in his office, his contemplative expression revealed the weight of the transformation we were undertaking. "Amara," he said slowly, "we've taken a significant step toward transforming this company. But I know this is just the beginning. Without your leadership, we wouldn't have come this far." "James," I replied, "this isn't something I achieved alone. Our employees' courage and support made it possible, especially Mia's contributions." He nodded. "We'll make sure Mia is recognized for her bravery, and we'll continue this journey of change together." In the following weeks, we began to see the first results of our new policies. Communication among employees improved, and the anonymous reporting system allowed us to address cases of discrimination and misconduct swiftly. Those who participated in the training programs embraced the company's new culture with enthusiasm. One day, Mia approached me with a small note in her hand. Her eyes sparkled with joy as she handed it to me. "Amara, I felt I needed to write this," she said. "It means so much to know our voices are finally being heard. Thank you." As I read the note, tears welled in my eyes. It said, "Dear Amara, we're here today because you weren't afraid. Thank you for helping us believe. We now feel we have a future here. With endless gratitude, Mia." Finally, I embarked on a journey, not as a leader, but as a passenger. I wanted to see firsthand the impact of the changes we'd made. During the flight, I observed the warmth of the flight attendants, the peaceful atmosphere in the cabin, and the way every individual was treated with equality and respect. Gazing out of the window, I felt a profound sense of peace. This was only the beginning, but we were on the right path. I now understood that the sky could be more than a means of transportation. It could also symbolize justice and equality. And I, Amara Johnson, was proud to be part of this transformation.